You know, tiny houses, they represent this dream of a simpler, more affordable life. But what happens when that simple dream crashes into a really complex and confusing legal maze? Today, we're diving into a regulatory showdown that you've probably never heard of, one that pits the federal government against a private rulebook. And honestly, the outcome could change the entire tiny house movement.
So it really all comes down to one big question. When we're talking about tiny houses on wheels, who's actually in charge of the rules? You'd think the answer would be simple, right? Well, it's not. It's way more complicated, and it's created this huge clash of authority.
Okay, so to get our heads around this maze, you first need to know the two main players who are kind of calling the shots. Now, on paper, their jobs are totally different, but as you're about to see, one of them is making a move that really blurs the lines and threatens to throw the whole system into chaos.
So in one corner, you've got HUD. That's the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. They're the federal government. They make the actual laws. And in the other corner, we have the ICC, the International Code Council. Now, these guys are a private group that writes model building codes. Think of it like a set of recommendations that cities can choose to adopt or not. The huge difference? One is the law of the land, the other is basically a suggestion.
All right, so to really understand where things went sideways, we have to start with the official rules of the road. Let's look at what HUD, the federal authority, has actually said about tiny houses.
And look, HUD is crystal clear about its role here. They've drawn what's called a jurisdictional boundary. Their authority is all about the manufacture of a home, how it's built in the factory. But what you do with it after it's sold, how you use it, where you park it, whether you live in it, that is intentionally outside of their federal control.
And they are not being shy about this at all. This isn't some interpretation. This is a direct quote from their own rulebook from 2018. HUD explicitly says that what you do with a home after it's built is up to your state and local government, not them. They are deliberately drawing a line in the sand.
And you gotta understand, this isn't some new thing they just dreamed up. This federal framework has been around for decades. HUD created the RV exemption way back in 1982. They clarified it over the years, and then they doubled down and reaffirmed the whole thing in 2018. It's a long-standing federal rule.
And at the very heart of that federal rule is one magic number, 400 square feet. For decades, this has been the key. It's the simple threshold. If your structure is under this size, it can be considered an RV and be exempt from HUD's much stricter manufactured housing rules.
So here is the really crucial point to get. HUD has the legal power over all sorts of structures, but it makes a deliberate choice not to regulate everything. This decision to step back is a federal one, made by HUD and HUD alone. It is not something they pass off to private groups or local towns.
Okay, so that's the setup. Now here's where things get interesting. The ICC, that private standards group, publishes a new standard for tiny houses. But the real drama isn't in the standard itself, it's hidden right up front in the introduction, in a little section called the foreword. And bam! Right there in the intro, the ICC makes a pretty stunning claim. It suggests that if a local government adopts their private standard, then a tiny house could qualify for an exemption from federal rules. This is a massive deal. They're essentially proposing a new, unofficial backdoor to a federal exemption, one created by a private organization. But here's the twist, and it's a big one. The real key to this whole mess is found just a few lines away, in that exact same foreword. There's a disclaimer.
And oh, it's a doozy. The ICC itself straight up admits that the foreword, the part with that explosive claim about federal law, is not part of the official standard. It wasn't even subjected to public review or the formal consensus process that standards are supposed to go through.
So let's just walk through this for a second, because it's kind of wild. You make a bold statement about changing federal law, but you put it in a non-binding introduction. Then you add a disclaimer saying it's not actually part of the official reviewed standard. It's a pretty clever way to put a powerful idea out there without having to really stand behind it.
And this is exactly where everything just collides. You now have two completely opposite views on how the rules are supposed to work. And that creates a massive amount of confusion for everyone, from the people building tiny houses to the people buying them. Let's just put them side by side, because the conflict is right there in black and white. On one hand, you have HUD's position. Federal exemptions come from federal law and federal choices, period. On the other hand, you have the ICC forward's implication, that a local town adopting a private standard can somehow create a federal exemption. These two ideas just cannot coexist. This table just breaks it down perfectly. When it comes to exemptions, HUD says,
That's a federal decision. The ICC implies, well, local adoption can do it. When it comes to occupancy, HUD says we don't regulate that. The ICC standard is designed specifically for permanent occupancy, and on authority itself, HUD sees it as their choice to regulate or not, while the ICC seems to treat federal rules like an obstacle you can just reroute around.
So who cares, right? It's just a fight over a foreword in some technical document. Why does any of this matter? Well, because this is not just some academic debate. This has huge, real-world consequences for the entire tiny house industry.
What this really boils down to is a classic case of what you'd call jurisdictional overreach. You've got a private standards group that appears to be swapping its own judgment for that of a federal agency. They're trying to reroute the established rules of the road. And that's not some abstract problem. It creates real-world chaos. This confusion blurs those clear lines that HUD drew. It completely undermines predictable system. And here's the kicker. It shifts all the legal risk and liability away from the people who wrote the standard and dumps it right onto local code officials and manufacturers. They're the ones left holding the bag.
I mean, the analysis on this couldn't be more blunt. This move by the ICC isn't a clarification of federal law. It's a substitution of private judgment for federal regulatory authority, and it was done in a non-binding forward that openly admits it wasn't properly reviewed.
Which brings us to the final and maybe most important question. When the rulebook itself comes with a disclaimer that basically says this isn't really part of the rules, who's the one left holding all the liability when things go wrong?